On this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, we discuss the importance of resting well, the value of reading, the value of physical exercise, investing your time purposefully, and not trying to monetize everything. All this and more in this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds.
Game begin.
Let's go.
I used to be a marketer like you until I took an arrow to the knee.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen, and guess what? I am joined by Sean. He is back. Welcome back, Sean.
It's good to be back. 3 weeks.
Why were you gone?
Flies.
For what reason would you
My
leave
beloved
us?
wife expunged a small child from her body and then was very sore for several weeks, and I waited on her hand and foot as best as I could so she could recover, and she's doing a great job.
That's awesome.
So
Good
it's great
guy,
to be
Sean.
back. But those 3 weeks went by quickly. I don't know if they went by quickly for you, but for me, they flew by.
Well, yeah, it felt like everything blended together because of your wife decided to give birth during my Kickstarter, which was not
Yeah.
very thoughtful at all. You know, she should have waited, you know.
I missed the end.
Yeah, but we did great, and you did a great job setting up the rest of the team for success. So and actually, the topic at hand we wanted to discuss is related to rest, the importance of rest and how to rest well. This is not just me saying take a break. I'm not going to tell you about marketing. We're going to talk about sleeping on this podcast, but we're going to dive into the topic of really, I guess, creative energy and how to harness it and how to restore it. And this is the essence of what I think excellent marketing requires. Is it requires your creative juice to flow, and it requires you to have good ideas and to actually have the capacity to think through new thoughts, which is a lot harder than you might expect. In fact, I will start the podcast by saying that 95%, statistically, 95% of the thoughts that we think from one day to the next are the same. Only 5% of the thoughts that we think in any given day are different from one day to the next. And when I say this, I'm talking about, if you're going to have lunch, you may have Mexican food or Italian food, but you're thinking about lunch, and that's kind of the way that and I can't remember where the study comes from, but that's how they categorized thoughts. So the major things that influence thoughts that you have are, according to the study, were the people you meet and the books you read. So it relates to the actual things you do. I know. I listen to books more than I read them nowadays. But yeah, so I think that it's if 95% of our thoughts are the same from one day to the next, and the only way to develop interesting, or well, to I guess not the only ways, but the dominant ways to think new thoughts are to, listen to podcasts, read books, engage with, other thoughts that are different than the ones that you're typically faced with, or other situations, I'm sorry, than that you're typically faced with. I think that we can, you might just expect that that's all you need to do, but in reality, I think when we are creators, which adds another dimension to this in regard to complexity, because we need to make stuff that people want to buy, and that requires innovation. And so I believe that the thoughts that a creator needs to think must go well beyond 5% originality from day to day if you're going to make something innovative. And so we're going to kind of talk about how to make sure that you are able to innovate, that your brain is able to keep up. So did I frame that well, or what would you add to that?
No, I think so. Yeah, really the importance of rest. Now, you have some vacation planned up for your family, don't you? I know that you just had a very successful Kickstarter, and that's been very taxing. But you sort of made an agreement with your family. It's like, I'm going to be away for the next month, of my head buried in the sand. But there's this thing to look forward to afterwards, and I'm sure that really was an encouragement to your family. I think it's really important that you look after your family. there's actually one thing that was said to me by a friend before I took my sort of 3 weeks off to look after my wife and kids. And my friend said to me that, at work you're replaceable, but in the home you're irreplaceable. And I thought
Right.
that really stuck with me. So that's a very sort of poignant statement. Like, yes, you could be replaced in your job, but you can't be replaced as a father in your home. And
Yep.
there's a far deeper influence that you have there. And those things are important to manage and to set aside time for. So I don't know if you wanted to speak into your thoughts on why you have a vacation planned or what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that when you are, let's say, when you're single, you're able to do a lot of things that because you want to do them. But when you're married and with as many kids as I have, especially, you really have to negotiate everything, and not negotiate, but you have to come to an agreement on everything with for me with my wife when I'm doing anything major, even if and we're talking major, like I'm 39 years old, so going out in the evening time is major. Oh, if you're in your 20s, it's like whatever. But when you're older and you have kids and other things, like being gone in the evening means that my wife has to take bedtime, has to feed the kids by herself and corral them and make sure they brush their teeth and all of that solo, which is a lot of work when you have 7 children. So, um, when if I were just to spring on her, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna be gone, by the way, next week, Thursday," she's gonna be like, "Well, okay, next week, Thursday, I will now mark it on my calendar and dread Thursday, because you're not going to be here." So if I do leave somewhere, like I was invited out to dinner by a pretty large, well, the owners of a very large local game store called Nightwatch Games next week. And they wanted to pick my mind on Kickstarter and other things like that. It's like, okay, yeah, happy to do that. But, my wife and I came to an agreement that I was going to do that. And that was, approved, if you will, and that this is how we will deal with it, and so on and so forth. And I think that that's actually really important to just simply manage in the family. So the question that you asked was about the Kickstarter. I told my family for 24 days, and actually even longer than that, before the Kickstarter begins, I'm going to be a little bit of a ghost because I have to run Next Level Web and Crowdfunding Nerds, and those are the things that provide our incomes and all. But at the same time, like, this Kickstarter campaign is going to take a lot of time. I didn't know exactly how much time it's going to take, but I know that I'll probably be working late. Maybe I'll have the weekends off, as my goal is to, like, try to take the weekends off, but it's going to be very taxing for me. You're not going to see me as much. And so to compensate for that, we planned a vacation. We actually don't take vacations all that often. And normally it's like a weekend with maybe, like, I'll take a Friday off and a Monday off, and that'll be our vacation, just a little stay at home vacation. But this time we're actually leaving for just over 2 weeks, to my parents' house in San Diego. And we're going to go all sorts of different places. And I will generally not be on our podcast. I won't be, I'll work as minimally as possible and just try to not think about marketing and not think about the fact that I have a Kickstarter that I have to deliver and, everything else. But I just get to think about the family, you know? So,
And
um,
I think even that, in terms of your Kickstarter, those expectations of rest even extended to your Kickstarter community. I believe there was one day where people were asking questions, I recall, and some of your other helpers saying how Andrew, he takes Sundays off, so he's not going to, he'll be responding to you tomorrow about this particular question. And I think that's also important because I think a lot of people understood, oh yes, Andrew isn't around on Sundays, so I'm not going to ping or ask questions. And you kind of set that expectation even within your community that they know that, yeah, there's a day of the week where you can't be reached because that's your day off, and you intentionally
right.
take that time off.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 things that are black holes in this world: actual black holes and marketing. And, and, marketing is one of those things that will take every bit and just every bit of whatever you have to give and say, "I'll take more." So I could, spend every waking moment waiting for somebody to actually comment something. We had, 2,000 comments on our Kickstarter campaign, or more than that, if you count all the updates and whatnot. And, there are just a lot of things to answer. There are frequently asked questions to update. There are communities to update. There are lots and lots of people engaging and asking questions and sharing their excitement and whatnot. And that's not even considering all the actual work that I had to do, writing updates and writing email market or email blasts and trying to, and doing podcast interviews and other things like that. And it is easily just there's no amount of effort that you can put into marketing that will satisfy marketing. It will always be asking for more. So I do think that it's very essential that you put guidelines forth that, don't make it a mystery to your audience, but make sure that your audience knows I will be available between this time and that time. I've got, a lot of stuff happening, but I'm going to make sure that I answer your questions around here and around there. And I know of business professionals like real estate agents that will say, I answer my voicemails at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. or, something
Mhm.
like that. And as long as I have some sort of expectation of when you'll get back to me and I'm not making it up in my own head, then I'm okay with this. But if I answer one person's question on Sunday and not yours, then you're going to feel like I looked at it and felt like it wasn't worthy of being answered, or your mind will be left to wander. And usually it goes to a negative place. So I think it's very important to have expectations. And also, another thing that you said was I actually had other people that were responding this time. That is something I didn't plan on our very first Kickstarter. And I remember my wife and at the time, Ryan, who didn't work for us back then, but does now, I was like, dude, I really need help. Can you please answer questions on our Kickstarter? Just tell people that I'll get back to them if you don't know the answer. And so between my wife Christy and Ryan just volunteering their time for our first Kickstarter, that was so important for, because it was just a very busy a busy Kickstarter. So
Are you Andrew? Are you familiar with Aesop's fables? They're like these little children's tales. I think it was by a Greek slave called Aesop who wrote these little
oh yeah,
tales.
if you watch Rocky and Bullwinkle as a kid, you know him. But Aesop's Fables, the one that I always talk about is, am I correct in saying that the scorpion and the crocodile, or I always call it the scorpion and the crocodile, but it's a scorpion and a frog?
Well, it probably is something that they all seem to involve some type of animal
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's
So
doing something. Like the
they're
mouse and the lion is probably the most notorious one or
where
infamous.
the mouse pulls the thorn from the lion's paw. Um, yes, and they are excellent. They have excellent morals. They're kind of like life lessons and wisdom in unlikely forms, I
Well, the
guess.
ones that the one that we have, my children particularly like, is the ant and the grasshopper. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No,
Where,
tell it.
well, the the ant is sort of diligently during the summer storing things away for the winter, while the grasshopper is having fun in the sun and not doing anything. And then winter comes, and the grasshopper has run out of food, and he then has to ask the ant for some help. This is the moral of the story: is that there's a time to play and there's a time to work. There's a time to rest and there's a time to get things done. So it's a good little story to drill into the kids that
Mhm.
this is work time. You need to work, and then there's playtime. Playtime comes later. But it's the same with us as adults. There's a time to work and there's a time to rest.
Mhm.
There's a time to play games. Actually, we wrote an article for Bible Gateway where we talked about the kind of theology of play and this
Yeah.
this concept of there actually is a time to play games, and
Mhm.
it's good, and we can even justify that from the scriptures of when it is to play games. In fact, I was just listening to Zechariah, it's a prophet in the Old Testament, and it talks about um, when Messiah comes and sets up his kingdom on earth, that Jerusalem is going to be marked by children playing in the streets, and that's kind of the idea
Mhm.
of paradise is that there's going to be nothing wrong or dangerous, that children would just play in the streets, and that's sort of the symbol of
Yeah.
paradise is this idea of play. But coming back to this idea of resting and playing, I think it is really important that when you're resting, you're resting. And this is something I had to make a conscious decision to do.
What's it mean to rest, I guess? Maybe we could define that. Yeah, how would you define rest?
It's the inaction of doing work. It's the
Okay.
cessation of doing work probably is how it.
All
so
right.
so
So
yeah,
it
I think
doesn't,
it.
maybe in particular, like, w- would doing yard work invalidate the rest that you took, or are we, it's, in particular, like in your case, because you had a paternity leave, it would be the rest, a very purposeful rest from doing specific work, right? And
Yes.
mhm,
Well, I suppose I was helping my wife, so even though I was quote unquote
mhm,
resting, I had time off. I was occupied and doing other things. But when I wasn't helping and those in the evenings, all the kids were down. The temptation is to check your emails and to get into work mode. But I tried to make a conscious decision that even when I had done all my my duties for the day, I wasn't checking emails. I wasn't going on messages, and I did it occasionally because you need to keep on top of things. But that's also the position that I was in over those past 3 weeks.
so then what benefits would you say so you took 3 weeks off, and then you're back kind of today is your first day that you actively purposefully involved yourself in work. um do you feel charged up, ready to work harder, or you know what I mean, like what I guess was the net result of taking that time off?
Well, I think when you have young children, you never you can never get fully charged up.
Yeah.
I certainly feel mentally in a refreshed because it's mentally getting your head out of a certain space and thinking about different things, experiencing different things. Certainly has been refreshing in that sense. In terms of energy output, I don't think. I just think you're always sort of just surviving when you've got little kids.
Yeah.
You're just always getting by. So, but I did. We did in terms of resting, try to sleep in. I'd get my wife breakfast in bed so she didn't have to get up. So we had a lot of lazy mornings, and in fact, it was quite embarrassing because mom times I had to answer the door at like 10, 11 o'clock, and I'm still in my pajamas. But we took it pretty relaxed, and so I think that's something to think about as well. That when you do take rest, it's not just resting your physical body; it's resting your mind as
Mhm.
well, or making your mind think of different things, which
Yeah.
I think can actually strengthen your work. Because when you do go back to work, you've been thinking about different things that can then
Mhm.
inspire or help you think about things that you can solve within your work.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that so like during Kickstarter, I'm in the trenches working like super hard, very focused on all the things related to making sure that Kickstarter is as profitable as possible, that as few one thing that a lot of people don't really talk about is after you have people back your campaign, those people, some of them will adjust their pledges down to the $1 pledge level, or they'll cancel their pledge and that kind of thing. And I found we earned about between five and $6,000 a day on our Kickstarter campaign uh, for our worst days. Some days in the mid campaign, we would earn as high as 18 or $20,000. And so one of the things that I had to come to terms with was that if I didn't properly communicate the right things in a timely manner, people would drop their pledge. So just because somebody is committed and they're everything all in and gung ho, it doesn't guarantee that they are going to be your backer when the campaign is concluded. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of work to be done. And a lot of stress comes as a result of that, just trying to make sure all the work is done, and then thinking, what else could I do? What else am I not thinking? What else have I not solved? What problems have I not solved? What problems exist that I don't know about? Do people have questions that I am not answering? And every Tuesday, every morning, especially on every Tuesday, but not limited to Tuesdays, there'd be a lot of people that would cancel or adjust their pledges in the morning. And it was so frustrating sometimes because it's like, man, we got like 12 pledges and 11 cancellations or changes. It's like, holy cow, that's just net gain of one pledge. And then, of course, over the course of the day, we'd have another 50 pledges or something like that, and it'd be fine. But yeah, it was a little bit agonizing if I would pay such close attention. And so there were certain things that I did to insulate myself from that. where like I don't receive emails about the number of cancellations for a Kickstarter, which is a setting you can select. I didn't scroll down far enough in the dashboard to see how many people had canceled. I was very purposeful about that as well. And in that way, my mind kind of had rest from the stress of people canceling. I just focused on, rather than the numbers, which is not something that you can change directly. You can't just go and change a number from a 2 to a 7, but you can look in your comments, and if somebody has a question, you answer it in a timely manner. Or if people have questions on your social media or your whatever Facebook group, Discord server, Board Game Geek, and they seem like they're similar questions. People were asking about, for example, our upgrade kits. What's in the upgrade kit? That was something that we were able to put in frequently asked questions and then refer to that all the time. Made things much easier. We stopped getting so many questions about that. And we were, it was just, we had probably as a result fewer cancellations. We couldn't directly impact the numbers, but by doing by focusing on result producing activities and not focusing on the results, we actually were able to get, in the end, the best results given the time that we had to spend. Right. So I guess maybe the point of that is that you can rest in some ways, even when you're being very active. You can rest from, in a way that allows you less stress. I don't know. But holy cow, after the campaign was done, I needed to not think about any of it.
Mhm.
Like I haven't yet looked to see if the money has been deposited into our bank account. Like that's what, and that's actually, as of like a few days ago, I knew it wasn't, but it's something that I think I needed to be done with all of that stuff. And there came a point after the Kickstarter campaign's over, I knew I needed a nap, maybe a couple of them. But um, over the long term, I wear a Garmin device, and it tracks my heart rate. It tracks my what's called HRV score. It's like a heart rate variance of some sort. And there's a healthy range and an unhealthy range. And when my Kickstarter began, this is the healthy range, if you're watching on video, it's the healthy range. My Kickstarter began and like it immediately went into unhealthy. Like you're going to have a heart attack eventually if you don't make some sort of change, or at least your body has this excess amount of stress that makes it unhealthy for you. And then after my Kickstarter campaign ended, it took about a week before that metric started to climb back up.
Mm.
And there's just like a lasting stress that happened to my body even after the campaign was concluded. And I found that it really began to get better, at least those metrics began to get better, when I stopped working on the Kickstarter campaign, and really when I started work at 9 a.m. and got off work at 5 p.m. That is something I try to do. I try to work from 9 to 5,
Mhm.
and I try not to work before that or after, but having to work until 6 or 7 had a big impact on the amount of I guess overall stress that my body experienced. And because I had to work, from, I don't know, 7 in the morning till 8 at night most days, um including, a part-time day on Saturday. So I was pulling probably 70 or so hours a week, maybe 80 hours a week during Kickstarter. So, but yeah.
Yeah, it can get pretty hectic. That's for sure. So when Andrew, when you're resting and you have time off, what do you spend your time doing?
Well, there are a couple of things that I really like to do. One, I actually like to play games. So I've been soloing some board games lately. I've been playing Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs, which is pretty fun. I've been playing Wingspan, the Isofarian Guard, and those are some of the games that I've been really enjoying a lot lately. Undaunted 2200 Callisto has been a really fun one in our house. We've been enjoying those. Just myself, my wife, and sometimes with my kids. Sometimes me by myself if I have an hour on a, like, I would be very purposeful even during the Kickstarter that I would play a game that was not Deliverance on Saturday or Sunday as part of rest. Like that was something I would do as a like I would solo a game or two. And so those types of things help me take my mind off of what's going on. And I think, like you said earlier, r- when you when your mind is consumed with the project that you're working on, you know, you have to be able to rest your mind and put your mind on other things, and games really help with that. Another thing that helps with that is jiu-jitsu. For me, I really love Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's a healthy way of working out where I get to strangle my friends, and um, it's really hard to think about anything else when somebody is actively trying to strangle you. Like, you just, it's not possible to think about your Kickstarter campaign. So, but I will say that because of, you know, the typical stresses of, we'll call it my day job, even though this is my day job, um, and a Kickstarter on top of that, which is, you know, it's very much related to what I do here. You know, people that listen to this say like, oh, this guy's done a Kickstarter too. He's like me. And yes, I am a lot like you, but that's a separate company. It's a separate initiative. Right. And so I feel like I'm full time, like I have full time work, and I'm working full time with the game, you know, a publishing company as well. So I actually wasn't able to work out for about a month and a half, and that took a toll on my body. In fact, I was in my chair so much, and I have a really nice chair. I have like a astronaut's chair. It's a really good one, but I remember like my knees started hurting. Like, why are my knees aching? And I finally made it into our chiropractor. We have a chiropractor we trust that does a really good job, and he was like, yeah, your knees are aching because your hamstrings are shortening because you're sitting in you must be sitting in your chair a lot. I'm like, yeah, I'm sitting in my chair like 12 hours a day or more. And I'm not walking around or anything like that. Normally I take trips to the kitchen to get more water or something like that. And I just wasn't doing any of that. So my wife was coming in with food and coming in with water and whatnot. And so here I am sitting in my chair, um, and not realizing, yeah, my muscles are responding. They're like, wow, this guy really, really wants to be very, very good at sitting in his chair. We're going to make sure to shape his body like a chair. And so, yeah, it gets pretty rough. So you need a break from stuff like that. But at the same time, you know, I work, I work out and I try to be healthy and whatnot. And I ask so that I can ask more of my body at certain times. It's very helpful to have you know, to live in balance, if you will, with hobbies and whatnot, so that when you need to take a temporary break, you can mentally make it through. I was mentally able to deal with it. Yes, I know I'm not working out right now. I'm not going to jujitsu right now, but after the Kickstarter, we're going to start again, and it's a finite time, and that really kind of helped me through it. So the grind is significant, but then the rest afterward is like the thing that I look forward to, that allowed me to say, yes, I'm grinding right now, and I feel like I can't do all the things while everyone else just gets to enjoy themselves, but it's temporary, you know, and this is going to end at such and such a time and whatnot. So that helps a lot. So yeah, I pretty much play games, I do jujitsu, and then I spend time with my kids. You know, we watched a fun movie yesterday, and I just, you know, we go outside, and that was kind of what I was not willing to sacrifice for Kickstarter. I wanted to make sure that I spent time with my kids, and you know, whenever I had me time, I actually gave that to the family. So I kind of sacrificed my me time, if you will, in order to make sure everything else got done. And the family, I think, um, you know, was where I would kind of go for comfort and solace and whatnot, you know? So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's important that the things that you do outside of work, or the things that you use for rest, are so diametrically opposed to what you're used to doing. So if you have a desk job and you're sitting down a lot, it's probably good to do something that exercises your body or gets you up and walking. Or if you have a job where you're standing a lot, like I have a friend, and he works on machinery and he's standing all day. So when he has time off, he probably just wants to sit down.
Yeah.
He's like very much just wants to sit and play a game or play a board game or something.
I
So I
remember
think
thinking my dad was crazy for so my dad's a civil engineer, and he would what that means is he sits down in front of a computer all day working on a program called AutoCAD, which is what he would do for work. And he I remember him telling me one day, like we were really into MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries, this old school game, and I remember I had a joystick and everything, and it
it's a
was
good
so
game.
fun. Yeah, dude, I played a lot of MechWarrior. So you know, as a kid, and I remember asking my dad, why don't you play very much? Like, because I have my save file, and then he has his save file. We had one computer in the house, you know, and I would watch him if he would play. I'd watch him, you know, and my dad would never watch me or anything. And eventually, he kind of slowed down, stopped really playing, and he was like, I'm on a computer all day. I don't want to be on a computer when I get home. It's like,
Mhm.
you know, if I'm sure if my dad was, you know, living today, he would probably want to be on the computer because there's so many awesome things to be done on a computer nowadays. But that was his thing, and he wanted to be off the computer, and it felt like work in a way, you know. So
One thing that we do is we have a lot of really nice forests around us, like Irish dense forests. So we go for like long walks in forests, and that's a really way. It's exercise because you're walking. It's not
Mhm.
exerting, but it's really peaceful because we don't bring phones and we just go with the kids and we just walk and enjoy the forest. And I find that it's quite
Mhm.
refreshing and it's quite relaxing. You feel quite rejuvenated after that. And another thing that I do is I spend a lot of time reading, read a lot
Mhm.
of books, or try to read a lot of books. I kind of just feel like it's the superior YouTube. In fact, I just looked at a podcast yesterday, I believe, and it was like an hour long podcast. But this particular podcast also included a transcript.
Mhm.
I just read the transcript, and this hour long podcast. It took me 10 minutes to go through all the content just by reading it because you can kind of
Yeah.
skip. You can skim read. You can skip the questions that aren't interesting to you. So there was about 10 minutes of actual reading uh, in this 1 hour episode. So I feel like YouTube and podcasts can often just be uh, a poor replacement for reading books.
Yep.
I think another thing, the advantage of reading books is that a lot of people don't read books anymore.
Mhm.
So you're probably going to encounter information that people aren't encountering.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of people can listen to a podcast and then just regurgitate what they've heard from another
Yep.
podcast or another video, and it doesn't become too useful.
Yep.
Well, you might encounter a legitimately new approach or way of thinking about something from a book. So I think that's important.
Yeah, you know, it's I actually really enjoy taking walks with my wife. Our kids are at an age where my oldest is 12, so she can make sure that the baby is safe when we're out walking and whatnot. And so, you know, my baby's almost 1 now. And so my wife and I can actually go for a walk, and which is not a thing that I would normally do on my own, or that I would have started doing on my own. I would have maybe done other things, right? But my wife wanted to go on a walk, and so I did, and it has become a regular thing that we try to do because I will take a cell phone because we need a cell phone for an emergency at
SOS.
that, but not my cell phone. We'll take hers, and we'll end up talking and having these great conversations that we never would have had when we're at home or if we're playing a game or whatever. Like our minds just wouldn't have gone to the places that they go when we're walking. And it's almost like, I don't know, it's just a very cool thing that I would highly recommend. Go out on a walk or even a run. Your mind goes places and you start to process thoughts that kind of arise up from your subconscious that I think can really help you, kind of like mentally process things you've experienced and whatnot in and so and yeah being intellectually honest, I think watching a YouTube video is just way easier than reading a book. And so
Mhm.
people tend to just binge YouTube videos, YouTube content, because it's like low. It doesn't require as much thought. It's almost a, you know, you're just looking to be entertained, and which is unfortunate because a lot of the YouTube shorts or TikTok or whatever, in anything that's short form content, you're going to find is intellectually dishonest and has some sort of angle. It's like, look at this one guy zing the other guy, like this guy owned that guy, and it's just, especially during the political season in the US, it's like, look at Ben Shapiro own this Kamala Harris supporter, or Trump said something
Destroy, isn't
stupid,
it? Destroy,
watch him
super
get
destroy.
destroyed. Yeah, yeah, it's
Destroy.
like, I don't know, man. For all the incendiary rage bait that you see online, it's just much easier for your brain to consume than than to read a chapter out of a book. First of all,
Mhm.
the chapter out of the book, it's just a different speed, like I as a, I'm a millennial, but I'm like an internet dude. I want things at 9,000 miles an hour, and I want to hurry up and get it. Even if videos along, if it's Twitch TV or something and I'm watching somebody, um, it feels like something's always happening. I can just constantly be entertained. There's always something new, even if I'm not learning anything. It feels like I'm doing something. But when I read a book, everything is quiet around me. It's like weird and awkward and slow, and like having to just process the single line of thought that I'm actually digesting off of a page. And it feels like the whole world has slowed down. And my ADD brain needs more stimulation. And I feel like, oh man, I don't have time for this. I'm too busy to read, and that's actually, it feels like, it's a lie that I think holds a lot of people back. It holds a lot of people back.
It's a skill you have to develop
Mhm.
for sure. It's something I try to teach my kids, like, really, because we homeschool, so they're quite small at the moment. So our four kind of our kind of key focus at the moment is trying to get them to learn how to read, how to write, how to think, and how to speak. If
Mhm.
they can do those four things well, then it doesn't matter what they do from then on, because if they can do those things well, then they can really go to any industry and
Right.
learn it and then develop.
Yep.
So learning how to listen is another thing that we practice. So we will often sit them down and have quiet time. And the goal is to get them to sit down and listen to. So we might read something. We're going through Red Wall at the moment.
Awesome.
And then every now and again, I'll pause when I kind of see that they've lost interest. Okay, what happened? And
Mhm.
then get them to like do a bit of comprehension, try and encourage them to sit down and listen. I think it's a very important skill to develop. And like reading is another one. Um, I think another problem with YouTube is that it's a very good way to get information quickly, but you'll probably find your attention. It's like in one ear out the other,
Yeah.
because it's so quick, and then you're on to the next thing. And then, whilst I think with reading, it gets you to slow down, really focus on what you're reading. And one thing that I do that's helped me with reading is taking notes. So if I read something, I encounter
Yep.
something, oh, that's really interesting, I then jot it down, have a little note system. And so I can then look back on my notes past week or 2 weeks or a month and actually, oh yeah, these were all the things I encountered that were interesting. I don't know where those things might be useful in the future at some point, but if I ever decide to write a book, then I've got all these kind of cliff notes I can kind of compile together. Or if we're preparing a podcast like this, I can kind of look back at some of the things I've read. Oh, this was interesting, and kind of highlight them somewhere. So I found that helpful in terms of retention, because you can read all the books in the world, but if you're just it's in one ear and out the other, and sometimes you can do that, you can read a passage and then your brain is somewhere else. So actually, I just read this
Yep.
entire page.
It's
I
like
didn't
you have to
take
go
anything
back
in.
like 3 pages.
Let's
I
go
remember
back.
reading, like I would go to, this was me in the long time ago, but when Harry Potter was, when the books were coming out, I remember I would go to the midnight release at Barnes and Noble. I would get the book and read it by like 8 in the morning. So we'd go to the midnight release and I have it read, quote unquote, by 8 in the morning. And then I'd go back and be like, wait, I don't remember this. Like I read again and like, this is like a new information. And my brain was just like off, for part of the time. Or I'm reading and then I realize like, wait, I don't even know where I am. Let me go back, and I have to go back like 3 pages and read, whatever book it is. But yeah, it's definitely, I think it's a very good skill set to have. If you can read, you can teach yourself how to do anything, absolutely anything in the
Yeah.
world. Reading is what is required. You can teach yourself math. You can teach yourself a lot of really cool things. So, but yeah, I think that retention is a big deal. If what I like to do, rather than reading a whole, like, I don't know, reading Harry Potter is one thing, like just crushing that book real quick. It's like, okay, that was entertaining. Um, or whatever, but it's, if I'm reading, I don't know, 1984 by George Orwell or something like that, or some other story which I've actually never read. I would like to one day. I've been hearing enough about it, but or Lord of the Rings, or just something that's like a lot thicker, or even something that like Purple Cow by Seth Godin, or whatever. These types of things, it's better to read like one chapter and then apply what you've learned, or reflect on what you've learned. It almost takes like the movie Inside Out or Inside Out 2. You have short-term memory, and then you have to, at the end of the day, you process all that short-term memory into long-term memory banks, and you jettison out a bunch of other stuff that you don't really plan on keeping into your memory banks. And I think that the important things, it's very easy to gloss over the important things and just record what is convenient, or what you already agree with, or things like that. So I think your confirmation bias is a dangerous thing, again, especially during election season. Using politics as an example, everybody has a confirmation bias where things that are, where you're more likely to agree with and retain things that you already, for positions you already hold. I think that,
Hmm.
books are, or, even, I don't know, lectures or whatever, even YouTube videos can be this way, where like if you listen and you study, it's a lot easier than just like letting it happen to you. But with a book, you must study it, because if you don't read it, it's not going to enter into your mind, unless somebody else reads it to you or whatever. But I think that you start to break down barriers, um, and hear things, and they enter into your neocortex, and you start to actually interpret and think your own thoughts. I mean, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying, if you read, you will have your own thoughts to think, but if you watch a YouTube video, oftentimes you'll just be a parrot for someone else's thoughts. And
Yeah,
I think
I
that,
largely
yeah.
agree with that. I also think I tend to read things which are more factual, and then I listen to things which are fictional. So I have an Audible account. So if I have a tendency to listen to something like Lord of the Rings instead of sit down and read it.
Mhm.
But if there's something that's a bit more like a historical book that's rooted in history, I would tend to read that because it's
Mhm.
more kind of factual and numbers and dates and things. So I think there's a benefit to listening to books and then reading them
Mhm.
as well. You can also cover more ground. I think the thing I found important as well is like having multiple books, going through multiple books at the same time, because it's kind of like long YouTube videos. You can watch like an hour of one, pause it, then switch to another one, a different topic, watch that for a bit, pause it, and go back, and then depending on your mood, you can sort of switch around. And I found that to be helpful to kind of not get bogged down, feeling like, oh, I've got to finish this book before I move to the next. Like, oh, I could put a pause here and go to this book because now this one's interesting me, and you kind of
Mhm.
slowly get through them all.
Yeah.
So during my time off, I finally finished Plato's Republic because I've been wanting to get through that
Wow.
for a
That's
while.
like
There's a
big
lot of
boy
ground
book.
covered. Yeah, a lot of ground covered in that. But that was interesting going through that. I got through one on psychological warfare, which was interesting.
Mhm.
Then I had one on the CIA, which was also interesting. So those were sort of the three, and none of them were really related to board games or the gaming industry. And I think that's important as well, that you do things which are outside of your kind of regular day to day thing,
Mhm.
because again, it kind of makes you put your head in a different space,
Yeah.
and that's really important.
Yeah, I think when it comes to making games or making things that people love, innovation is the key ingredient. It's like the Powerpuff Girls: sugar, spice, everything nice, and then ingredient
Chemical
X,
X. Yeah.
chemical X. Yeah, that's right. I think that each game that is on my shelf has some sort of generally the games that I play, the games that I like, the games that attract me, has some sort of really interesting blend of board game mechanics with a really good theme. And games that feel like they have a pasted on theme, they don't really get played a whole lot. So if I feel
Hmm.
like this game could just be something else and didn't really need to be this theme, I don't feel connected to the theme, and I don't know, that theme really helps me get into a game, whatever it is. And so the mechanics are there to kind of help me with this story, this narrative that's going on inside my head of like, I don't know, with Deliverance here, I really feel like an angel slaying demons and, on the verge of defeat or whatever, or Undaunted 2200 Callisto, it feels like I'm this giant corporate, or mega corporation that's trying to keep these miners down, and my wife is like this rebel group of miners that want their freedom on Mars or whatever, right? On the moon of Callisto. But it just is fun. Like I can kind of get in there and almost like role play, just like as we're playing. It just makes it more entertaining, But it takes expertise to kind of understand, obviously as the more sci-fi fantasy you go, the more kind of far out you can get. But you need to be able to understand, you need to have understanding, especially if you make a historical game. I don't know, on my left I have Commissioned and Crusaders. You need to understand those periods of history if you want to make a game about
Yeah.
the early church or the Crusades or whatever. But or even like, I don't know, Chronicles of Crime right above me. You need to know what it feels like to romanticize, to be a romanticized detective, in noir or whatever genre. You need to know those things, and you don't know them by just growing up. Like you have expertise in your hobbies and the other things that you did other than board games, and if all of those things have been done, it's really hard to innovate. So you have to put new information in your head, right?
We once marketed a game called Dutch Resistance, Orange Shall Overcome, and it's
Mhm.
about the Dutch resistance in World War II who resisted the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. And that came at a really good time because when we got that project, I just finished reading Corey Ten Boone's book, The Hiding Place. So that my head was like in that space. It was really interesting being able to like they market it, kind of knowing a bit more of the historical context of that historical game. So that was fun to kind of tap into that and kind of already have my head somewhat familiar with that time in history and that actual country.
Yeah.
So it was good.
Yeah, there's this character actually. So one of the things that we did for Deliverance was we made a character for Sam Healy. We gave him a Viking angel in essence, and Sam got to name it, got to do. We did the art after Sam, and I asked like, what would you like the story to be? And he's like, I would like it to be something more historical, that's rooted in actual history. There was this kind of conversion of Vikings from raiders and pillagers to to Christians, and it was a big thing, right? In history, and I don't really know a whole lot about that. So I'm like, well, I guess I better start reading. And we had another guy on the team that was like, yeah, there was this, um, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a Viking leader that converted to Christianity and cut down a tree called Donner's Oak, and that sparked a major revival throughout the Vikings and was a significant event. And I'm like, I know nothing about this, but I am so intrigued right now. It's like I got on this rabbit hole, kind of like you get into like Roman wars and whatnot, and there's
Mm-hmm.
this huge rabbit hole that you can go down. That's what I'm doing with Vikings right now. I'm like
Beowulf,
very
man.
fascinated. Yeah.
Start. That's
So
where you got to start.
yeah. So
Oak and Shield.
I'm very, very excited about this right now. But I mean, eventually it could result in me making a game that's themed, after Vikings or whatever. But in any case, I feel more educated, and I think that bottom line, that's where innovation comes from. And it's a nice break from the monotony of what I do each day. So, we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of maybe getting back to the concept of rest and how to rest well. It gives me more in my toolkit that I can work from. And it certainly allows my brain to rest so that I can have my mind sharp for my clients or for the marketing initiatives that we're doing and that kind of thing. So on the, I guess in terms of how this actually helps you be a better marketer, where would you go? How would you respond to that question? How does resting make you a better marketer?
Well, it rejuvenates you. If you keep on doing the same thing over and over, you're eventually going to get. Well, you're gonna go through the motions, and your I think your performance output will significantly decrease. So if you want to actually be better at working, you need to rest, which just seems like an oxymoron, but it's actually true. And you have to kind of work another oxymoron is you got to work at resting, which means you have to be deliberate about resting, and so that you rest well and that you work well. If you go back to the the fable of the ant and the grasshopper, there's a time to work and there's a time to rest. There's a time to play. There's a time to work, and you need to make sure that those are sort of separated in your day-to-day activities so that you can do both of those well. In terms of being better at marketing, I think if you rest well, not only will you have increased focus and performance output, it gives you an opportunity to experience or encounter things which are outside of your general day-to-day activities, which you can then bring or incorporate into your work. One thing I've been doing on the side is learning ancient Greek, Koine Greek.
Mhm.
Epitomesai, soy kurios.
Oh, snap.
That's
What was that?
from, you'll like this, that's from the book of Jude, the
Yeah.
Lord rebuke you,
Oh, snap.
which is
It's
what
Michael the Archangel.
epitomesai, which is rebuke, soy is the, and kurios is Lord. So the Lord rebuke you. So it's a cool thing to learn. And the cool thing about learning Greek is that you start seeing it everywhere because so many English words have their derivatives from Greek. And then you can even work out the meaning of words if you know the Greek root. So it has all these sort of unexpected benefits that I just kind of wanted to do it because I thought it was cool and you could read ancient texts, but you start seeing other applications for it outside of what you originally thought. So
That's amazing.
You never know what it's going to do. So I think if something interests you, and there's probably some way it can be incorporated into something that you're doing later on.
Yeah, I think creative energy is, you have a finite amount of that each day. I think that creative energy generally resets each day. You have a bank of creative energy that you wake up with, and it needs to recharge. It recharges to, let's just say, by default, about 30% of what your capacity is will recharge overnight. And then the only way to get it to charge beyond that is to, number one, shut off the drains of your creative energy. So even when you're working, like for me, I create ad text. I need to have creative ad text that gets people interested, that is targeted and focused and purposeful, that makes people interested in whatever board game or whatever product I'm selling. Then I feel like after work is over, I'm like a Lamborghini that is punched to the red line, like I'm moving nowhere though. So it's like the wheels are not on the ground, but I am spinning them, like I'm pressing the gas in the car all the way down, and the engine is working really hard, but I'm not actually traveling anywhere. So what you need to do is you need to stop the drain of creative energy from your like post work time by not thinking about work. So when you're thinking about work, be very purposeful and make progress forward and whatnot. But then as soon as you are kind of off work, you need to find ways to not let work live in your head rent free, I guess, if that makes sense. Right.
And I think this has increasingly become difficult because of how things are monetized on the internet. And I've seen this a lot where a lot of things, especially in the hobby space, there's now an opportunity to monetize that, right? Now, you could, in essence or in theory, play board games, be really into board games, and suddenly think, actually, I could turn this into some type of business. I could create YouTube content and monetize it, get sponsorships. And that's the danger. I think because of social media and influencer culture, basically everything now can become a source of income, can be monetized. And that's a really dangerous space to be in because you need to do some things which are not monetized, that you have no plan of ever monetizing it. Because then everything just becomes a transaction, and your life, I think, will really suffer if you just are constantly thinking in terms of transactions and you're not thinking, like, part of walking through the forest and not bringing the phone is so we don't take pictures, right?
Yep.
Because the danger is that you can't enjoy that moment, and then I have to document this so I can share it with friends and family later on. But then it kind of interrupts that moment. So, and I think it's the same with trying to document your hobbies in a similar way, where it's like, oh, if I document this, I could potentially monetize it, and then I think that's the pervading culture we have today, which we have to resist and fight.
Actually, on the topic of taking pictures, they did this. There was a study that where they took pictures of. So they took a camera to the Louvre in France, where the very famous Mona Lisa is. And there are a lot of other excellent paintings that are there, very famous paintings and whatnot. So they had a group of people that were supposed to go through and look and enjoy and look at the Mona Lisa and take pictures and other paintings and whatnot. And then a group of others that were not allowed to have phones at all. They weren't allowed to have any kind of technology, nothing to take pictures and whatnot. And the group that took pictures remembered almost nothing of what they what items that they took pictures of. And the group that did not take pictures remembered like way more. And it was, and what in the end they credited the difference not to that, well, I'll put it this way. What they did credit it toward was the people who took pictures were like, I don't need to remember this because I have a picture of it. I'll be able to look at it anytime I want.
Mm-hmm.
So they did not commit it to even short-term memory. It was like, yes, I
Yeah.
remember seeing the Mona Lisa, and I remember the general colors and whatnot, but I don't remember anything else. Like for me, I remember as a kid going to, not a kid, I was 21 years old. I went to the Louvre in France. I saw the Mona Lisa. I remember it being such a tiny picture in this massive enclosure that had glass that had to be like 18 inches thick. And it was just a really incredible thing. It was such a small thing. It's like, wow, that's the Mona Lisa. It's like so unimpressive. And at the same time, it's so legendary. Like, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a picture or a camera or anything like that. Um, and I remember thinking I wasn't allowed to take any pictures because flashes could ruin the photos the paintings and whatnot. And so I really retain that to this day. And so when I
Mm-hmm.
read this study, I thought that was so cool, and it's, if you have digital record of something, then what you will subconsciously tell yourself is that you don't need to remember
Yes.
because you have documentation, even if you never look at that photo again. So a lot of the time, very sadly, we have people that will take pictures and video of everything and not remember anything, not
Mm-hmm.
remember anything meaningful. It's very, dangerous, I guess.
It reminds me of, in film school, I had a lecturer who taught screenwriting, and it was sort of this kind of eccentric character, almost like a drill sergeant. Um, and he would like scream at you if you took notes. So you weren't allowed to take notes. So you had to sit there and just listen to him. And, looking back, I remember the majority of his lectures because of that. You couldn't take notes. So it worked, and yeah, so I completely understand that sentiment.
Yeah. Man, well, so any final thoughts on the importance of rest or how to rest well? Any advice that you would have, any bits of advice that you would have for people that have made it this far into our podcast?
I think scheduling, as you said, you try to start work at 9, end at 5. You have to sort of preemptively decide these things. Like, you take Sundays off. These are things you just have to like pre-plan. So I'm going to take a holiday in so many weeks or in so many months for this long. Otherwise, it'll never happen. And so I found that as well, that you have to be very disciplined in terms of being preemptive and having a plan and scheduling and sticking to that schedule. And even if it's like, oh, I feel like I could work a little bit longer, too bad. It's your
Yeah.
punishment for being
Yeah.
preoccupied during work. And like, you have to stop now, because the danger is, as you said, marketing doesn't turn off, and you could do it forever. So you do need to be very intentional of turning it off and working. When you're working, you're working. When you're resting, you're resting. And it's hard, but I think with practice, you get better at it. And it's just about being consistent.
Yeah, I think that investing time purposefully is difficult to do, um, but it makes your day so much more efficient. I find that allowing people to take time off in the middle of the day during their work, if they want or need to take that time, I find that they get just as much work done. In fact, there's actually a study that was done on people that are Gen Z versus baby boomers. Baby boomers that are working similar, the same job. Baby boomers like sit at the desk for the full 8 hours, whereas Gen Z are constantly either getting up, going to the water cooler, or they're on their phone or other things like that for about half the day. But the same amount of work output in an 8-hour period is achieved by Gen Z and baby boomers. Baby boomers sit at the desk 8 hours and work. Gen Z, in essence, sits at the desk for 4 hours and works, and the output of work is the same. And I think that is because and that was the study was the conclusion I think that they made was that the Gen Z people were very, very focused when it came time to work. They were like, dude, I need to get this done. Whereas baby boomers were
Slow and steady.
slower. Yeah, slow and steady. So I think that so I compartmentalize a lot. My number one takeaway, in fact, is that I compartmentalize everything. I work and I separate myself from family and gaming and everything like that when I'm working. And then when I'm playing a game, I'm not dad. I am, whatever the LFA, ready to, put those, I don't know, for in Undaunted 2200. I'm just, nobody probably understands the theme that's listening to this. I don't know. If you do, then we can be friends. But yeah, so I'm not, I'm not me when I'm playing Deliverance. I am Michael the Archangel slaying demons and whatnot. And when I'm with the family enjoying, I'm not a businessman. When I'm at jiu-jitsu, I could be, grappling with a homeless guy, and then, which is not altogether uncommon, somebody who lives out of their car, and then grapple with a doctor, a virologist, and then go on and grapple with a Navy SEAL, and then go on and grapple with like a guy who's a multi-millionaire finance guy or a billionaire finance guy, and then grapple with a student, and we're all equal, because I don't have my, the same level of, I don't know, like the classism in our society is totally broken down at that time. And I'm the only thing that matters is how good at jiu-jitsu you are on the jiu-jitsu mats, right? And so it's really a curious thing, but I think my personal recommendation is for people to compartmentalize who they are at work is not who they are, right? And you need to make sure to be able to express yourself in all facets of life and find, who am I when I'm playing games, and who am I when I'm working? And, that's much different than what matters. What matters when I'm working, what matters when I'm playing, is kind of the same stuff,
Yeah, and you're far more than what your work is. And that's one of the problems is that in our society, we can often attribute our identities to our jobs or our work. So who are you? Or I'm a doctor, or I'm a marketer, or it's a little facet of what you do. It's not who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, if you lose what it is, what your job is, if you don't do that thing anymore, then I've seen people, sell companies for millions of dollars and have a big golden parachute that they've been able to kind of retire at 40 years old. And, sometimes they lose themselves. They don't know what to do with themselves. We've talked a lot about resting. We've talked a lot about being purposeful in resting. And we've talked about the importance of rest. We've talked about how you can recharge your creative juice when you rest and when you rest well, and it takes work. So ponder on these things and go read a book.
Read a book, dummy.
Listen to another one of our podcasts that, and let's have Robot Richard send us on out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.